Rituals, I've jumped in and joined in, and it's been a really cool series to be part of. So thanks to Miriam for organising it and letting outsiders come and join in too. So I'm Jack, I work for Tear Fund. So to introduce myself, I'm one of these people who is trying to organise a wedding in 2020 of all the years to pick. So we swing from, oh, receptions are allowed, to, oh, receptions aren't allowed again, and oh, maybe they are. And my fiance is getting a white mask made to work with her dress. The wedding dress fitter said, oh, I'll get your mask to match. And it was just like, this is such a weird year. And I'm in Kingston upon Thames, kind of southwest London area. And yeah, I work for Tear Fund, so I'm in their campaigns team. So a big part of what Tear Fund does is advocating for people who live in poverty and with those who live in poverty, to speak up to decision makers and to challenge laws and practices and policies. And we do that all around the world, including in the UK. And so I sit in the team that does it in the UK. So I spend a lot of my time with churches and with groups like you, and trying to help us work out how we can use our voice together to bring about change where there is injustice that could be tackled through the way the government and businesses work. So that's kind of what I do. If you don't know Tear Fund, then we're a Christian international development charity. We work in over 50 different countries, and primarily we work through the local church, coming alongside local churches to support them to lift their communities out of poverty, to be good news in word and deed, wherever they are. So it is a joy to be with you. And as Miriam said, tonight we are talking about environmental justice. So I want to set out a little bit of a picture of where we're at today, and then think about what needs to happen. And then at the end, think specifically about what our response should be as Christians. But to start off, I'd love, if you can use the chat for this, I would love to hear if there are places that you've been enjoying going during lockdown. So I know for me in Greater London, I've been enjoying going to the parks, and now we're allowed further and to explore a bit more. I've enjoyed getting to the Surrey Hills, going for walks on the hills. And I even came to Deal a couple of weeks ago and went swimming in the sea, which was such a joy after so long in the city. So if you can pop in the chat, are there places where you've really enjoyed going out in the natural world, in creation, during this time, that's helped to kind of calm you, reset you, and give yourself a break? If there are any places, do share them in the chat. I guess the beach was going to be an obvious option, wasn't it? While we were in Deal, local paths, nice. On that, while me and my fiance were in Deal, we went for a walk with her parents to this like public footpath that went through like a strawberry farm and like apple and pear orchard. And then we ended up walking on this public footpath that went through a zoo, and we walked like between elephants, which was the weirdest experience. I did not expect to go walking with the elephants in Kent, but it was great. Great, some really nice places. So during lockdown, maybe it's the case for you as well, I found being out in the great outdoors really refreshing. It's helped me to relax and refocus, and to find time with God as well during what's been quite a scary time of just being out in a place where you know that God is at work, God has designed all that is around you, and being able to refocus in that time. And as I've been reading through some of the Psalms, you kind of see that happen over and over again as well. The psalmists use creation as this tool to draw them into worship with God. They describe the beauty of God's creation, the way that it worships him, in the way that it exists, and it draws them to God. And even in Jesus' parables as well, he so often talks about the natural world and uses it to point out the characteristics of God and teach people about who our Father is. He talks about the character of birds, or the relentlessness of weeds, or the power of a mustard seed, and uses all of these things in the natural world around us to draw us closer to our Father, and to teach us about the character of God. And I've just found that be such a solid rock I can stand on during this time of being surrounded by his creation, and just asking God, where are you at work, and how can I meet you in this place? Creation can often be a place where we can refocus on God. But obviously in recent years, which is why we're doing this talk, we've begun to notice things aren't maybe all as they should be. If you're a keen gardener, you've probably noticed flowers blooming earlier and earlier, just coming up at the wrong times and in the wrong seasons. If you watch the weather forecasts, you'll be very used to the word record. We've had the record driest May, the record hottest July. We've had wettest winters and hottest summers. And the word record just comes up over and over and over again. Every year is another record year. The past decade that's just finished was the hottest decade ever recorded. The second 5 years of that decade were the hottest ever years as well. We're really used to this word record now. And then, of course, there are more obvious examples of how things are broken. Every year in the UK, 64,000 people die from air pollution, from the impacts it has on them. Or there was the Stonehaven crash, wasn't there? The horrific train crash recently, where the experts were saying that wouldn't have happened without climate change. So we're seeing lots of the effects locally. And if you talk to farmers, they'll be sharing all the story of the way the rains are coming at the wrong times, and you get floods and droughts when you're hoping to harvest. And so we're seeing lots of change locally, but the effects of these are way bigger elsewhere around the world. And that's a big reason for why we work on these issues at Tearfund. Tearfund exists to see an end to extreme poverty. We're not an environmental charity as such, but we care about these issues, and we're working on these because we know if we don't act, we will never see an end to extreme poverty. This is a huge challenge that we need to face. So before we dive into that, I'm going to also try and share my screen. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of good news to set some context. Can you see that? Yeah, some nods, that's good. And I'll open the chat so I can see if anyone has a question as we go. So for some context, I'm going to give you a graph. Here you are. So this graph is the number of people living in extreme poverty from 1990 to 2016. And you can see an amazing trajectory, maybe not one that you expected. Over my lifetime, we have seen extreme poverty reducing quite rapidly. The work of charities, the power of the local church, the growth of businesses in poorer countries, the generosity of churches and individuals, and so many other things have helped to see extreme poverty reduce quite rapidly over this time. We've seen it more than halved in my lifetime, which is an amazing thing, and something that maybe you hadn't noticed before. We often just see another advert on TV of people who are hungry. It's really good to pause and look back and see all the progress that we've made. So that's the context that we're coming to this in, that we're seeing amazing progress. But in recent years, we're starting to see that progress coming undone or being harder to maintain. So in 2016, for example, world hunger increased for the first time, and it's continued to increase every year since. So we were on this amazing downward trajectory, reducing poverty, seeing more girls in school than ever before, seeing children live well beyond their 5th birthday, more and more people with access to water and electricity, and more and more people able to reach their God-given potential. But since 2016, world hunger has begun to increase every year. And that is because of climate change and because of conflict. And a lot of that conflict has been exacerbated by climate change. We're seeing more people displaced and becoming refugees, and more people facing severe droughts. And all of this is related to how we've acted within God's creation. So if I put another line on this graph, so this orange one here is the average global temperature change. So it goes from 0 degrees to 1 degrees of change based on 1950s levels. So you can see that, again, 1990 to today, we've seen temperatures climbing upwards. And now we've reached 1 degree of warming at least. We're now about 1.1 degrees warmer than we were in the 50s or earlier. So we've seen this other trajectory happening at the same time. The ways that we've damaged God's creation is then undoing all of this progress that we're making on poverty. So this is kind of why at Tear Fund we're engaging with this with such energy, because we want to see people able to fulfill their potential. We don't want to see anyone hungry, but because of climate change, we're seeing famines last longer, droughts and flooding are becoming more extreme. Recently, during lockdown, there was a cyclone Amphan in the Indian Ocean. This is a picture from Bangladesh. So Cyclone Amphan was a cyclone that hit Bangladesh and India. It was the most powerful cyclone in the Indian Ocean ever recorded, another record for us. And it hit the coast of Bangladesh. Millions of people were affected, over 100 people died, and it hit the Rohingya refugee camps as well. So people who were already displaced, impacted even more by this change in climate. And with super heavy monsoon rains that followed, now a third of Bangladesh is underwater. Now, if you've cared about poverty and injustice for a while, you'll know Bangladesh suffers floods quite often. But these floods are getting worse and more regular because of our changing climate. And so what we're seeing is climate change is exacerbating things that already exist. But as well as more water, we're seeing more droughts as well. So in Ethiopia, for example, farmers who've known the rains and passed down the seasons from generation to generation are now seeing the rains not coming when they used to, coming far less and at much more irregular times. At the beginning of this year, we were bracing ourselves at Tear Fund because there were 45 million people at risk of food shortages because of drought across the African continent. And with lockdown and farming being reduced again, that's an even greater risk. So we're seeing that climate change is exacerbating all of these problems. But it's not just climate change. We're talking about environmental justice. And so the bigger picture is that climate change is part of a much bigger problem of damaging of all of God's creation. So we're seeing species going extinct at really rapid rates. The headline on the screen that we've wiped out 60% of animal populations since 1970. Even in the UK, 1 in 6 species is now at risk of extinction. And we're seeing plastic pollution having a massive effect on the world's oceans and wildlife, but also people in poverty. That headline there, that plastic pollution kills 1 person every 30 seconds in developing countries. The headline from some research that we did at Tear Fund a couple of years ago. So what we're seeing is there's a huge bunch of issues that all come under the same umbrella, that we've pushed God's creation to breaking point. And we're seeing the impact of that all around the world, at home here, but also, and much worse, in the world's poorest countries. So that's where we're at. We can see that climate change is not a distant or future problem, it's something that's already here. It's already impacting millions of people. So if this is where we're at, what needs to happen next? So when it comes to climate change, there is one number that you need to remember, this big one on the screen, 1.5 degrees Celsius. So for years, there's been this big global network of scientists, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they gather the world's best scientists from all around the world, hundreds of scientists, and they all collaborate into these reports that get given to world leaders about the state of the climate and what needs to happen, their predictions for different directions of travel and policies. And their work concluded that we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees of warming. So if you remember back to that orange line a little minute ago, we saw that we were approaching 1 degree. We're now at 1.1. And they said we need to keep to 1.5 degrees of warming to avoid the worst effects. So why we need to avoid going over that is because this problem continues to escalate as it gets hotter. So already the situation in Bangladesh and Ethiopia and at home is bad, and it will get worse. So for example, if we allowed warming to get to 2 degrees instead of 1.5, it would mean there would be more than 100 million more people struggling to get water. There would be 4 times as many tropical cyclones. 12 million more people would be flooded in coastal areas, and droughts would last twice as long. And that's just that's just half a degree difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees. 100 million more people struggling to get water. And then there's also the threat of what they call feedback loops. So the idea that as the problems get worse, they kind of feed back into themselves, and it's a downward spiral. So as it gets hotter, forest fires will get worse. As the trees burn, they release CO2, and that then is a downward spiral. Or the poles are covered in ice, which kind of works like a mirror. So it reflects heat from the sun back into space and keeps us at a good temperature on Earth. As that ice melts because it's warmer, the mirror gets smaller, less heat gets reflected back, and it escalates. And so there's far more risk of that if we go over 1.5 degrees. So for all of those reasons, they say we have to keep within 1.5 degrees of warming. Anything more than that is devastating for the world's poorest people. But despite all of that science and all of that knowledge, and despite the obvious consequences that we're already seeing and that are being predicted, we are nowhere near on track to keep to 1.5 degrees. Emissions are rising every year. This year is an unusual one. We've had the start of the year with so much of the economy put on pause. But if we just start up again, then emissions will continue to rise. And currently we're on a trajectory for probably about 3 degrees of warming. So if you imagine just half a degree was 100 million more people without access to clean water. 3 degrees is absolutely catastrophic. Yeah, pretty awful. All of the progress that we've seen on poverty would be undone. So the longer we wait, the harder it becomes, and we are way off track to keep to 1.5 degrees of warming. To get there now, we need to halve all of the emissions that we create from the way that we travel and power our homes, and the way that we grow food, and all of the other areas that produce carbon dioxide. We need to halve all of that in this decade to be on track to keep within 1.5 degrees. So this is a huge justice issue, and it is really urgent, which is why so many people are now saying that this is a climate emergency, that we really are running out of time to limit the worst effects of this crisis. So if that is the big picture, if this is the world that we're in now and the trajectory that we're on, what's it look like for us to respond as Christians? So in Matthew 22, Jesus is asked about what the greatest commandment is. And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on this. So of course, tackling these environmental justice issues is crucial to loving our global neighbors. If we don't act, then we will see more people pushed into poverty and more people suffering. And so to love our neighbors at a time like this means we have to address these problems. But also this is part of loving God, isn't it? Because God delights in his creation. He calls it very good. He reveals his character to us through it. And as we see species wiped out and the rainforests cut down and all of those kind of things, we're seeing that good creation reduced, and the glory of God that's revealed in it becomes much harder to see. A colleague of mine met a family from China who said because of the smog and the pollution, their daughter had never seen the stars. But of course, in the Psalms, we read that the stars declare the glory of God. And so actually the way that we treat this creation is um, is a way that we can help people to see the love of God, to see his presence and his glory in the world. So this world is deeply broken, but I think the world is waking up to that problem. And in some ways, this is a real opportunity for us to talk to the world about our sin and our brokenness. It's a really visible way that the way we have acted as people has damaged our relationships with each other and with God and with creation. And so we have a chance to speak about that with people and also to offer a better direction as well. People know that the system is broken, that it's not working as it should. In Romans, Paul says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test what God's will is, his good, perfect, and pleasing will. And I love this verse because I think it helps us to think about what we do in response. That actually we notice some of these broken patterns of the world around us, and we say, actually, we're not going to conform to those patterns. We're going to model something better, something that reveals the kingdom of God to the world around us. So underneath climate change and environmental breakdown, what we see at the bottom of it really is this consumer culture that we live in. The problem at the roots are that we have consumed too much stuff, used it up, thrown it away as if it was just there to be disposed of. And as the church, we can speak really powerful into that root problem. Because consumerism tries to teach us that we find our identity in the stuff that we buy and wear and drive and throw away. Our identity is found in that stuff, says the world around us. But actually, as Christians, we know we find our identity in Jesus, and that we can be freed from the anxiety and the burden of finding our identity in what is consumed. We know that we have ultimate value, and that is not found in brands or products or consumption. Consumerism obviously never satisfies either. There's always another upgrade or a new color. And in Jesus, we can find fullness of life, contentment, and we can teach people to live in a simple and content way where they live well with each other and with creation. And the third thing that consumerism does is it disconnects us from our global neighbors. So we see products on a shelf or on a hanger, and they're just there ready for us to consume and throw away. But actually, we know everyone is created with this beautiful potential, that we can see the image of God in those around us. And as Christians, we can speak powerfully into that broken system and say, actually, we're called to love our neighbors, to know the people who make our clothes and grow our food and care for what has been given to us. And so we can speak really powerfully into that root problem of consumerism. We can help people to see that their identity is in Jesus and not in the stuff that we're throwing away. So very quickly to finish, I think there's 3 practical ways that we can respond to this as Christians, to challenge the culture around us, not to conform to it. The first is to live differently. So to model that story that we're talking about, to live in a way that challenges the norms of the society around us, to say, actually, I'm going to live in a way that loves my global neighbor, cares for God's creation, in a way where I find simplicity and contentment rather than constant consumption and disposal. Some of the big ways that we can think about reducing our emissions are in the ways that we travel, if we fly or drive, in how we power our homes, if we can switch to a renewable energy provider, and how we eat and consume as well. This is really important for our discipleship and our worship. In James, it says love does no harm to its neighbor, but the way that our society works is doing serious harm to our global neighbors. And so we can model something different in the way that we live and provoke the people around us to be asking those questions of, why are you shopping like that? Or why are you living in that different way? In the previous verse from the one I read in Romans, the Message paraphrases it as, so here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Actually, our normal everyday activities, the food that we eat, the lights that we turn on, the car that we drive, can all be part of that worship. And that can be part of us deepening our relationship with God. But if living differently is the only thing we do, then we are going to fail to protect our global neighbours who need really urgent action on this climate crisis. So we also need to be speaking up and praying. To see us keep within 1.5 degrees of warming, we need a massive change of direction from government and business. It is a huge challenge. But I want to challenge us as the church that it's really easy when we talk about things like climate change for me to tell you the stats and the predictions of how bad it could get. But it's really hard sometimes to imagine how good it could be. And as the church, we can be people who cast that hopeful prophetic vision, because we know a God who can do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. We know a God who intends well for all his people, who hates injustice, a God who parts seas and moves mountains. And we can believe that a much better, fairer world where we live well with creation is possible. I want to introduce you, just as I finish, to Dr. Twange. So this is Dr. Twange. She lives in Malawi. She's an ecologist, and she specializes in aquatic life in the lakes. And she is part of the Malawi Creation Care Network, which we helped to set up at Tearfund. And she is an amazing woman. She does all of this research because she understands that God cares about his creation and calls us to steward it. But she was noticing that plastic was a big problem in loads of places in Malawi, that it was cluttering the streets, blocking waterways, and causing a lot of sickness. And so she gathered other church leaders and activists and scientists together, and they did a big march through Blantyre, one of the big cities in Malawi. And she brought a couple busloads of students with her from her church. So she gathered them together and said that we're going to do this together. And they drove down to Blantyre, and the police stopped them on the edge of the city. And they said, we've heard about this protest that you want to do, and we don't think it should go ahead. We're not going to let you in. So she looked at the bus, and the bus full of students was almost vibrating, she said, with all of this energy. They were writing songs and chants about caring for creation. And so she looked at this bus that was full of energy, and then she looked at these police officers, and she said, would you like to go and tell them that they have to go home? And the police officers looked at each other, and they kind of paused, and then they said, no, we don't want to do that. And so they waved Twange through with all of these students, and they managed to do this march, and they were telling all of the different people around them about the problems of plastic. They were interviewed by the local newspaper, and they were on TV. And they said, we want to see single-use plastic banned in 10 days, otherwise we'll be back. And we'll be bigger because everyone's heard about it now. And within that time, the government met, they talked about it, and they reinstated a historic ban on soft plastics. And it was an amazing moment for these campaigners to say, actually, we can change stuff when we speak up together. And they've continued to battle to create good and green jobs in Malawi. So it's an amazing story that the church really can make a big difference when we speak up together and when we ground it in prayer. So I want to ask you a couple of questions for the groups when we break up later, which are on the screen, about how we can live differently and speak up. But Miriam, are we doing Q&A now before those groups?
There we go. I think if people have any questions now, then put them in the chat box, but I think we'll probably do the questions after, just so we have time to discuss different things in the groups for about 10 minutes. Right. And then we can ask questions. And if anyone has any questions which they discuss in their groups that they want to put forward to Jack, we're quite a small group today, which is lovely. And so we can have time to ask those questions to you. More people are coming. So yeah, if you have any questions for Jack, just put them on the chat box, and Jack will be happy to answer them. I've been quizzing him on some questions. So yeah. Whilst we're waiting for people to type questions up and things, Jack, do you mind just sharing a bit about your challenge which you did with Caitlin this year about the rubbish in the jar thing?
Yeah, sure. So last year 2019, me and my fiance did a zero waste challenge. So we tried to create as little landfill waste as we possibly could. And then we collected it up and we combined it into a jar. And I went and fetched it while I was talking to Miriam earlier. So this was our jar for 2019 of all of our landfill rubbish for the year, which was super fun. So like we didn't just decide to do it and then just do it overnight, but we I started to learn about it in like 2015 and just began to think about like all of this plastic in the ocean, and now like learning that it affects people in poverty as well. But in 2015, just thinking like, God probably doesn't look at an ocean full of plastic and go, that's very good. And I was like, okay, what can we do? So I discovered there was this thing called Plastic Free July, where people take on a challenge of having like no plastic in July. I failed on the 2nd of July. It really didn't go very well. And then in October, there's this challenge called Zero Waste Week. So I convinced my family that we were all going to do it together. And I was going to do all of the cooking and the cleaning for them if they joined in this weird challenge. And so we took on the challenge for the week, and we used the same jar and we filled it in a week, which was way less rubbish than we usually created. And then carried on learning about it and making lots of swaps, and always thinking like, okay, if this is going in the bin, like what can I swap it for that can be different? And then last year, my fiance and I were like, okay, let's do this as a challenge. What we didn't think was that we did 2 challenges at once. And so we also did a fundraiser where we ended up traveling all around the country on public transport and camping and staying in those different places. And so we had to do camping zero waste as well, which was quite difficult. But we got there. So yeah, that was our jar for the year, which was super fun. Yeah, and one of the things I was just saying to you, Miriam, that I learned during it was that I had to learn to just accept that there were certain things that people were used to buying that I just couldn't buy anymore, and just had to accept that if I was going to live without rubbish, I couldn't have them. So things like crisps or like chocolate bars in plastic, although I found Tony's chocolate. Has anyone else had Tony's chocolate? It is the best chocolate, yeah. Big fans in the Smart household. Yeah, it's like they strive to be slavery free. It's wrapped in paper. It's like the most delicious chocolate. It's the best thing all around. But other than that, wasn't having much chocolate. So yeah, that was one of the things I learned, was I just had to say no to things. Whereas like the world around us says you can have whatever you want at the click of a button.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions for Jack, either put them on the chat box, or because there's not many of us, just feel free to unmute yourself and then just ask Jack.
Right. I have a question. I was halfway through writing it, it's easy to read out, it's quite long. So my question is, with the problems with concentrated waste from battery meat farming going into watercourses and deoxygenating water causing fish to die, the drastically higher emissions from battery meat farming, as well as the problems with salmon fishing and the high levels of sea lice and water pollution, which have been known to affect wild salmon's population. Do you think battery farming is now an environmental issue as well as an animal welfare issue?
Yeah, so is factory farming a environmental issue and an animal welfare one? Yeah, yeah, I definitely think it is. Like for many of us, if we don't fly very often, the food that we eat is probably one of the big chunks of our carbon footprint, especially the way that it's mass produced now. There was some research done while I was at uni by a professor called Peter Scarborough, who's at the University of Oxford. And they did some like years worth of research about diet. And they found that if you went vegetarian, you reduce your carbon footprint by 35%, which is pretty huge. And they said if you went entirely plant-based, you would halve your carbon footprint. So it's like the equivalent of taking a car off the road each year. So if you went vegan for 2 years, that would be 2 cars off the road kind of thing, which is pretty huge. And challenged me to think like, okay, what's it look like to reduce like how much meat I eat? Especially, so the biggest polluters when it comes to meat are red meats like beef and lamb, and then pork's the next one. Chicken has a much lower carbon footprint, but I think to be honest, I feel really challenged about chicken because of how mass produced it is. Like, for some reason, we feel like it's okay to cram all of these birds into the same space. So in the UK, each day, we eat about 33 million eggs and 2.2 million chickens. And about 95% of those chickens are intensely farmed. And so they might be in a cage with 90 other birds. And that's the kind of situation when I don't think God looks at that and says that's very good. And it makes me really uncomfortable because like I enjoy meat. And so where I'm at the moment is feeling that morally, probably being a vegan is the right thing. It's just also a hard thing for someone who's used to eating meat and dairy. And so I save meat for special occasions. So I'm, for example, going to see a really close family friend this week, and we're going to have meat. But for like most of the year, I won't eat it. I'll maybe eat it 3 times a year or something, and then really celebrate and thank God when I do eat it, and try and source it well when I do. Yeah, I think it's a big environmental challenge, but it's really uncomfortable because many of us enjoy it and are used to it. But a bit like me giving up crisps, it's one of those challenges that's like, oh, maybe I can't have this that I've been used to having all the time. Yeah. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you with the welfare of chickens. But the one thing I would say maybe is that free-range organic chickens, as well as better welfare, they eat more grass because they're inside, they can eat grass. They don't have as much soya, which is quite bad. High soy diet. But even like, although I'm mainly vegan, I have to, Mum gave me an article about soya today, and I have to really think of where, there are better plant-based milks with lower emissions. So I think it's like, I think everyone really needs to look at their carbon footprint and environmental impact.
Yeah, definitely. I think we all definitely need to eat less and eat better quality, as definitely as a starting point, and then kind of continue that uncomfortable journey of like, okay, how am I going to live radically for justice and for Jesus?
I suppose as well as you can also look on the flip side of kind of new different foods you can try to switch. So I think that can help, but obviously be quite a negative. So looking down.
Are you able to just repeat that again? I think we just we didn't catch the end of that.
Sorry, I was probably mumbling. No, I was just saying I found it helpful looking at some of the positives of kind of foods that I could have rather than I kind of stop having meat, like new foods you could try. And like even if you're switching from other products that are heavily, that aren't meat, that are heavily of a high carbon footprint, again, sometimes you can find alternatives which are new and different quality, so they can be positive as well.
Yeah, I think for people who are trying to like eat vegetarian meals for the first time, it's much better to find a brand new meal and to enjoy that than go, okay, I'm going to have like ham, egg and chips but without the ham. See the massive hole on your plate, whereas if you try something, it's a much better option.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? I think we have time for probably one more, and if you have any more questions for Jack after we've gone off the talk, then email them to either me or Sheila, and then I can pass them through to Jack and get a response through that way.
Top tips for going waste free. I'd say do it one step at a time. So maybe just thinking about the kind of things that are going in the bin, and how you might be able to reduce those. So mine was like 4 or 5 years in the making, that jar, of just learning about different swaps that I could make. And you could maybe like say start with your bathroom or something and say, okay, can I get refill? We were talking about there's a cool refill shopping deal that do refills of all sorts of different things. So you might be able to like refill shampoo and shower stuff, or try out different things like that, see what works. And I'd say don't try and do it overnight. Some people do, but probably it's better to just do one thing at a time and continue to challenge yourself. Okay, what's the next swap I'm going to do? How can I reduce what waste I'm creating as I go? And you could even do a bit of a bin audit and think, okay, what are the big things that are creating rubbish and how can I reduce that bit out? Would probably be where I'd say start. There's one thing I wanted to share with you before we do finish, which is on the screen now. This year at Tear Fund, we've been thinking a lot about the role of prayer in all of our work. And the big thing for Tear Fund all around the world has been all of us like praying together, like teach us to pray, because prayer is totally crucial, as we all know, not just to our relationship with Jesus, but seeing like things really change when these situations feel really massive and insurmountable. So we started a prayer feed on WhatsApp. So each week at the moment, there's a different prayer update around climate change and the environment and its impact on people in poverty, and is a useful tool for us to be praying. So it might be like an update about someone like Dr. Tawange, who I mentioned earlier, and saying, please pray for them as they do this amazing thing. Or it might be about some world leaders meeting, or it might be about a meeting we have with Coca-Cola to lobby them, or anything like that, or something that's going on in the world, a disaster that happens. And then we can all be praying together. So it varies week to week what the content is, but if you'd like to join us in praying regularly about these kind of issues, we would love for you to pray with us. And we don't like promote anything on that channel. We literally just ask people to pray with us. That's one thing I wanted to share with you in case it was of interest. And I can send the detail. Oh, Miriam already has the details for those. So if that is useful.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, I think we're just gonna pray now, but just quickly before we do, I've just added the recording from the talk last week. I've just put that on there. If anyone wanted to rewatch it, if anyone missed it last week, then you can watch it on YouTube there. All the talks that are happening are being recorded and they're put on the St George's YouTube channel. So if you want to share them with your friends, or if you feel anyone would benefit from them, then just send them the link, and yeah, that'll be fine. Yeah, so next meeting, so we're meeting next Monday at 7:30 again. It's our final one. So yeah, so it's on local justice. We're going to have an amazing panel of about 5 to 6 people from local organisations, charities, police, schools, governments. Yeah, a lot of great people who know a lot about the sector that they're in. So make sure you bring questions with you. They're going to be talking about the main issues in our local area and what we can do practically to help those sort of injustices in our local environment. So yeah, so next week, make sure you bring questions and let people know if you feel they'll be interested in it. So yeah, so that's happening next Monday, 7:30. It'll be the same link, so yeah, invite your friends and things along. But yeah, that'll be cool. So Kath, do you mind praying for us? Is that all right?
Am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay, let's pray. Lord Jesus, we want to thank you for Jack and for the opportunity to hear him talk about all these issues tonight around environmental justice. I pray for Jack and his team at Tear Fund and for the amazing work they are doing to fight poverty in the UK and across the world. We pray for those people around the world who are already suffering from the effects of our changing climate. Lord, help us to remember that we are all part of God's creation, and help us all to live more responsibly and according to God's will. Help us to make changes in our daily life. Help us to be bold, to make decisions, to live differently, and to love our global neighbours. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Kath, and thank you so much, Jack, for joining in this evening. what you've said has been amazing, and I'm sure we can all take something from it. So yeah, thank you, and we'll see everyone next week.